On a sultry September evening in 2025, the Grand Meridian Hotel in Miami stood as a radiant beacon of opulence. Its grand ballroom transformed into a breathtaking stage for the annual Starlight Gala, a high-profile fundraiser for a children's charity that drew the city's most powerful and privileged. Crystal chandeliers, suspended like frozen constellations, cast prismatic beams of golden light across tables meticulously set with rare orchids, polished silver, and fine bone china that gleamed under the soft, ambient glow. The air was thick with the delicate clink of champagne flutes, the whisper of silk and satin gowns brushing against one another, and the low, resonant hum of conversations that carried the weight of influence. Deals being brokered in hushed tones, alliances forged over glasses of vintage wine, and egos carefully stroked in a dance of power and prestige. The guest list was a carefully curated tapestry of Miami's elite tech moguls who'd amassed billions in the digital revolution, their startups reshaping industries from healthcare to transportation, real estate tycoons who owned sprawling swaths of the city's glittering skyline, their names etched on skyscrapers, and socialites whose very presence was synonymous with luxury and status, their lives a curated performance of wealth. Among them was Vanessa Hargrove, the wife of billionaire tech mogul Preston Hargrove, whose empire of AI startups had revolutionized fields like logistics and medical diagnostics, making him a titan in a world driven by innovation and ambition. Vanessa, in her early 40s, was a vision of calculated elegance, her custom Parisian gown encrusted with diamonds that caught every flicker of light in the room, shimmering with each deliberate step she took. The gown's intricate beadwork hugged her frame like a second skin, a testament to her status and her meticulous attention to appearances. Her perfectly styled hair, swept into an elegant updo, framed a face that was both striking and severe, her sharp eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who thrived in these rarefied circles. Known for her impeccable taste and a tongue that could cut through any pretense with surgical precision, Vanessa wielded her position as a billionaire's wife like a scepter, commanding attention and deference from everyone around her. Or so she believed, her every gesture calculated to reinforce her place at the apex of this glittering world. Across the ballroom, moving through the throng of guests with the grace of someone who'd mastered the art of invisibility, was Marcus Wells, a 32-year-old waiter who had become a quiet, almost unnoticeable fixture at the Grand Meridian. For 5 years, Marcus had worked these high society events, his warm smile and understated professionalism earning him the quiet respect of his colleagues, though he rarely registered in the consciousness of the guests. Born and raised in Miami's Overtown neighborhood, a historically black community forged in the crucible of resilience amid systemic struggle, Marcus had learned early on how to navigate spaces where he was often overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. His ability to read people, their moods, their intentions, the unspoken hierarchies that governed their interactions, was a skill honed through years of observing the powerful from the margins, his presence a silent counterpoint to their ostentatious displays. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, his dark eyes always alert, scanning the room for cues, his hands steady as he balanced trays of delicate canapes or refilled crystal glasses with the precision of a seasoned professional. To the guests, he was just another server, a faceless figure in a crisp black and white uniform, there to cater to their every whim without drawing attention to himself. But Marcus was different, a man driven by a purpose that went far beyond the role he played in their world. He lived frugally, saving every penny he earned, a habit that puzzled his coworkers, who often teased him about his modest one-bedroom apartment in Overtown, with its peeling paint and secondhand furniture, or his refusal to splurge on the latest smartphones, designer sneakers, or flashy watches. They admired his work ethic, though, and the way he remained unflappable. No matter how demanding or dismissive the guests became, his calm demeanor a shield against their occasional cruelty. Few knew the depths of his ambition, the quiet fire that burned within him, or the dreams he'd been nurturing since he was a teenager, dreams that had taken root in the cracked sidewalks of Overtown and grown into something extraordinary. Vanessa, however, noticed Marcus that night, not for his skill, his poise, or his quiet competence, but for reasons that would soon ignite a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the ballroom's gilded walls, altering the course of the evening and setting in motion a chain of events that would redefine power in this rarefied world. As she sipped her third glass of champagne, her laughter loud and performative, cutting through the hum of the crowd, her eyes locked onto Marcus as he navigated the crowded room with his tray of crystal flutes. Her gaze wasn't one of curiosity or kindness. It was sharp, almost predatory, as if she'd found a target for her restless energy, a way to assert her dominance in a room already bowing to her presence. The ballroom was a sea of wealth and privilege, a carefully choreographed display of power where every gesture was scrutinized, every word weighed for its impact. Vanessa, emboldened by her status, and perhaps the champagne that loosened her tongue, seemed to sense an opportunity to reinforce her place at the top of this hierarchy. Her circle of friends, a group of socialites draped in designer gowns and dripping with jewelry, emerald necklaces, sapphire rings, and diamond earrings that sparkled like stars, egged her on with their giggles and nods, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of her audacity, their manicured hands clutching their own glasses as they watched the scene unfold. What followed would not only alter the course of the evening, but would reshape Marcus's life and send shockwaves through Miami's elite, a moment that would be recounted for years to come. The incident began with a simple mishap, the kind that happens countless times at events like these, so minor it would typically fade into the background, unnoticed by those not directly involved. Marcus was moving through a particularly packed corner of the ballroom, his tray balanced with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, his steps measured to avoid the swirl of gowns and tuxedos. Vanessa, gesturing wildly to punctuate a story about her latest trip to the Amalfi Coast, where she'd chartered a yacht and dined with European aristocrats, bumped into him, her arm, adorned with a diamond bracelet that sparkled like a small galaxy, catching the edge of his tray. A single glass of red wine tipped over, splashing onto the pristine marble floor with a soft clatter that seemed to echo in the sudden silence around them, the sound cutting through the buzz of conversation like a misplaced note in a symphony. The room didn't stop entirely. Conversations continued in other corners. The jazz band played its smooth, sultry melodies, and waiters moved through the crowd. But in that small pocket of the ballroom, all eyes turned to the scene. Vanessa's voice sliced through the chatter like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, her tone dripping with disdain as she turned to face Marcus, her face flushed with irritation, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Are you blind?" she snapped, her words carrying a venom that drew gasps from those nearby. Marcus immediately crouched to clean the spill, his movements swift and practiced, his voice calm and professional despite the sting of her words. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me get this cleaned up," he said, his tone even, his eyes focused on the task at hand. Vanessa wasn't interested in apologies or resolutions. She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, each step a deliberate punctuation of her anger, her voice rising to ensure everyone nearby could hear, transforming the moment into a public spectacle. "Sorry. Do you know how much this dress costs? More than you'll make in a decade, I bet," she said, her words laced with scorn, her lips curling into a sneer. Her friends, a group of women in equally extravagant attire, gowns of emerald green, sapphire blue, and ruby red, each one a masterpiece of couture, tittered behind their manicured hands, feeding off her venom like a pack of hyenas circling a kill. Their laughter was a chorus of approval, their eyes darting between Vanessa and Marcus, relishing the drama as if it were a scripted performance for their amusement. Marcus kept his head down, his hands steady as he wiped the floor with a cloth he'd pulled from his pocket, his face a mask of composure, though the weight of her words pressed against him. But Vanessa wasn't done. She leaned in closer, her perfume, a sharp, floral scent, filling the air, her voice growing louder, drawing the attention of guests across the room, their heads turning, their conversations faltering. "People like you shouldn't be allowed near events like this." "Can't you do anything right?" she said, the word, people, hanging in the air, heavy with implication, a jab laced with prejudice that cut deeper than the spilled wine. The accusation wasn't just about the mishap, it was a dismissal of Marcus's very existence in her rarefied world, a world where she believed she held unquestioned authority. The crowd around them grew quiet, some guests shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Vanessa and the waiter, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Others smirked, treating the moment as entertainment, a brief diversion from their champagne and small talk. A hedge fund manager in a tailored tuxedo, his cufflinks gleaming under the chandeliers, raised an eyebrow but said nothing, sipping his drink as if watching a play unfold on a stage. A young influencer, phone in hand, subtly angled it toward the scene, her fingers poised to capture a moment that might go viral on X, her eyes gleaming with the prospect of likes and retweets. Vanessa, emboldened by the attention, pressed on, her voice now a theatrical sneer, each word designed to wound. Maybe if you spent less time loafing and more time learning how to do your job, you wouldn't be such an embarrassment," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, her friend's laughter swelling behind her, a cruel soundtrack to her performance. Marcus stood slowly, his movements deliberate, his body unfolding with a quiet grace that contrasted with the chaos of the moment. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met hers, and there was no anger in his gaze, only a quiet intensity that Vanessa, in her arrogance, failed to notice. His face remained calm, his posture composed, but something in his eyes, a spark of resolve, a glint of something unyielding, hinted at the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. "I'll get you a new drink, ma'am," he said evenly, his voice betraying none of the emotions roiling inside him, his words a shield against her venom. He turned and walked away, his back straight, his steps measured, leaving Vanessa to bask in her moment of triumph. She scoffed, turning back to her friends with a dismissive wave of her hand, her lips curling into a smirk as she adjusted her gown, the diamonds catching the light once more. "Unbelievable," she muttered, her voice loud enough to carry across the room, ensuring her audience heard her final jab. "The help these days." Her friends laughed, their voices blending into the gala's hum, their gowns rustling as they leaned in to share their own quips, the moment feeding their sense of superiority. But the incident lingered for those who had witnessed it, a sour note in the evening's melody. A few staff members nearby exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of anger and resignation, their hands tightening around trays or cleaning rags. They'd seen guests like Vanessa before, entitled, cruel, untouchable, their wealth a shield against accountability. Some had endured similar slights themselves, their dignity chipped away by people who saw them as less than human, their labor invisible until something went wrong. One server, a young man named Javier, clenched his fists behind his tray, his jaw tight with frustration, his brown eyes flashing with anger he couldn't voice, his uniform feeling tighter than usual. A housekeeper, lingering near the ballroom's entrance with a cart of cleaning supplies, her hands calloused from years of work, shook her head and muttered under her breath, "Same old story, same old nonsense." Another server, a woman named Tasha who'd worked at the hotel for a decade, whispered to a coworker, her voice low but fierce, "She's got no right to talk to him like that." No right at all. But what Vanessa didn't know, what no one in that glittering ballroom knew, was that Marcus Wells was not just a waiter. He was a man with a plan, a past, and a purpose, and her words, laced with malice, had just ignited something that would unravel her carefully constructed world by morning. Marcus returned to the kitchen, his face unreadable, though his coworkers could sense the weight of what had happened, the air around him charged with an unspoken tension. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of clanging pots, sizzling pans, and shouted orders as chefs plated intricate desserts, chocolate tarts adorned with edible gold leaf, delicate macarons in pastel hues, and miniature pavlovas topped with fresh berries. Servers rushed in and out, their aprons stained with the night's work, their faces flushed from the heat and the pace. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, fresh herbs, and caramelized sugar, a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the ballroom, where every surface gleamed and every gesture was choreographed. But the atmosphere around Marcus felt different, heavier, as if he carried the moment with him, his usual calm tinged with something new. Carla, a fellow server who'd worked with him for years, caught his eye as he set down his tray on a counter cluttered with empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with a quick wit and a protective streak for her team, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun that had loosened slightly over the long shift, strands curling around her face. "She's a piece of work," she said, her voice low, her brow furrowed with concern as she leaned against the counter, her hands resting on her hips. "Don't let her get to you, Marcus. She's just another rich snob who thinks she owns the world." He nodded, offering a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, his thoughts already elsewhere, his mind turning over possibilities that Carla couldn't imagine. "Thanks, Carla," he said softly, his voice steady but distant, carrying a weight she couldn't quite place. He slipped into the break room, a small, dimly lit space with scuffed walls, a sagging couch that smelled faintly of stale coffee, and a battered coffee machine that sputtered with every use. Closing the door behind him, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. When the call connected, his voice was low but firm, carrying a resolve that belied his usual calm. "It's time," he said simply, his words clipped and purposeful. The person on the other end didn't ask questions, only replied, "It's done," their voice a quiet affirmation of a plan set in motion. What the Gala's guests didn't know, what even Marcus's closest co-workers didn't fully grasp, was that he had spent the last decade building something far greater than a waiter's paycheck, a legacy born from the grit and determination of a boy who'd grown up with little but refused to stay small. Born into a working-class family in Overtown, Marcus had grown up in a modest single-story home where money was tight but values were strong, the kind of place where love and discipline filled the gaps left by financial strain. His mother, Lorraine, was a schoolteacher who spent her evenings grading papers under a flickering kitchen light, her glasses slipping down her nose as she marked essays with a red pen, her voice gentle but firm as she encouraged her son to aim high. His father, Samuel, was a mechanic who came home with grease, stained hands and a wary smile, his overalls smelling of oil and metal, his stories of hard work and small triumphs a constant lesson in perseverance. They'd instilled in him a fierce work ethic and a belief that knowledge was the key to freedom, a way to break the cycles that kept so many in Overtown trapped in poverty and limited opportunity. "You're not just your circumstances," his mother would say, her voice warm but unyielding as she sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside her. "You're what you do with them." Those words had become his mantra, a guiding light through the challenges of his youth. College wasn't an option. Tuition was too steep, and scholarships were scarce in a system that seemed rigged against kids like him, kids from neighborhoods like Overtown where dreams were often deferred. So Marcus taught himself, turning his hunger for knowledge into a relentless pursuit of self-education. He spent his late teens and early 20s hunched over a secondhand laptop in his tiny bedroom, its fan whirring loudly as he learned to code from free online tutorials, staying up until dawn to master Python, JavaScript, and C++. The screen's glow illuminated his face as he worked through coding problems, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his mind absorbing every lesson. He'd fall asleep with his laptop still open, only to wake up and do it again, driven by a hunger to prove himself, to build a future no one else could see. From coding, he moved to finance, devouring books on investing markets and real estate, borrowing them from the local library or buying them used from thrift stores with crumpled bills he'd saved from his part-time jobs bussing tables or delivering groceries. He studied the strategies of Warren Buffett, pored over real estate case studies, and memorized the intricacies of cash flow, leverage, and market trends, his bedroom walls lined with notes and diagrams scrawled in his precise handwriting. By his mid-20s, Marcus had started flipping properties in Overtown, buying run-down homes with loans he scraped together from local credit unions, their interest rates steep but his determination steeper. He renovated them with skills he learned from YouTube tutorials and his father's toolbox, teaching himself to patch drywall, rewire electrical systems, and lay tile, his hands growing calloused from nights spent sanding floors until they gleamed. Weekends were spent hauling debris in the Miami heat, his clothes soaked with sweat, his muscles aching from the labor. Negotiations with contractors who underestimated him and buyers who haggled ruthlessly tested his patience. But Marcus was methodical, reinvesting every dollar into bigger deals, each one a step toward something greater. He didn't flaunt his success, didn't buy flashy cars or designer clothes, despite the teasing from friends who wondered why he still drove a beat-up Honda from his high school days. Instead, he lived modestly in a one-bedroom apartment, its sparse furnishings a testament to his discipline, saving every cent, his eyes always on the next opportunity, his mind mapping out a future that extended far beyond Overtown's borders. Over time, his ambition grew, his vision expanding like a city skyline taking shape. He moved into commercial real estate, acquiring strip malls, office buildings, and small hotels across Florida, each deal more audacious than the last, each one a testament to his growing acumen. He learned to navigate the world of high finance, securing loans from banks that initially dismissed him, their skepticism giving way to respect as he presented airtight business plans. He charmed investors with his quiet confidence and razor-sharp intellect, his ability to anticipate market shifts earning him a reputation among a small circle of insiders. By 2025, he was the silent force behind Wells Ventures, a holding company that had quietly amassed a portfolio worth hundreds of millions, its assets spanning commercial properties and tech investments. Marcus kept his name out of the spotlight, using proxies and trusted partners to negotiate deals, preferring to operate in the shadows, his anonymity a strategic choice. He didn't want fame, he wanted power. the kind that came from building something lasting, something that could change the game for himself and those who'd been overlooked like he had. His job at the Grand Meridian wasn't about the money. It was about access, a window into the world of the elite that few others could claim. Working as a waiter gave him a front row seat to their world, their deals, their rivalries, their careless confessions over too many drinks. He listened to CEOs discuss mergers in hushed tones, their voices low as they leaned across tables laden with caviar and foie gras. He overheard real estate tycoons lament bad investments, their frustration spilling out between bites of seared scallops. He noted the names they dropped: executives, investors, politicians, using the information to guide his own moves, his mind a ledger of opportunities and risks. He'd learned which companies were struggling, which properties were undervalued, and who was desperate to sell, each piece of information a building block in his empire. It was a masterclass in power dynamics, and Marcus was an avid student, his waiter's uniform a disguise that allowed him to move unnoticed through their world, gathering intelligence that fueled his ascent. The Grand Meridian itself had been on his radar for months, its Art Deco elegance and prime location making it a crown jewel in Miami's hospitality scene. The hotel's parent company, Meridian Properties, was in trouble, bleeding cash after a series of overambitious investments in luxury resorts that failed to deliver, their balance sheets a mess of red ink. The Grand Meridian, a 400-room masterpiece with ocean views, a rooftop infinity pool, and a reputation as Miami's premier destination for the elite, was their flagship property. But its parent company's financial woes had made it vulnerable, a fact Marcus had noted during a conversation he'd overheard months earlier at a similar gala. A Meridian executive, his tie loosened and his breath heavy with whiskey, had complained about the company's mounting debts, his voice carrying across the room as Marcus cleared empty glasses nearby. Marcus had been negotiating to buy the hotel through a proxy, a trusted associate named James who handled the paperwork and kept Marcus's identity hidden to avoid scrutiny, his anonymity a shield against the biases he knew still lingered in the world of high finance. The deal was close, but not finalized, until Vanessa's outburst, a moment that crystallized his resolve and set the wheels in motion for a seismic shift. Her words had struck a nerve, not because they were personal, but because they represented everything Marcus had been working to overcome: the assumption that wealth equaled worth, that people like him were disposable, that his presence in their world was a mistake. They echoed the dismissals he'd heard growing up in Overtown. The teachers who'd overlooked him in class, assuming he'd never amount to much, the employers who'd underestimated him, offering him low-wage jobs with no future, the strangers who'd dismissed him with a glance, their eyes sliding over him as if he were invisible. But Marcus had never let those voices define him. Instead, they fueled him, each slight a spark that fed the fire of his ambition, pushing him to work harder, to prove them wrong, not with words, but with actions that spoke louder than any retort. In the break room, after his call, he sat for a moment, staring at the cracked linoleum floor, his mind racing with the weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't angry, he was resolute, his decision made with the clarity of a man who'd spent years preparing for this moment. The call had been to his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elena who'd been handling the Meridian acquisition for months. Her office a flurry of legal documents and financial projections. Marcus had instructed her to push the deal through immediately, no matter the cost, even if it meant dipping into his personal reserves, a fortune he'd built through years of discipline and calculated risks. Make it happen tonight, he told her, his voice steady but urgent, carrying the weight of a man who'd waited long enough, who'd endured enough slights to know that this was his moment. Alina didn't hesitate. She knew Marcus was serious, his quiet demeanor masking a will of iron. She rallied her team, worked through the night, and by 2 a.m., after hours of frantic negotiations with Meridian Properties' desperate board, the papers were signed, the funds transferred, and Marcus Wells was the new owner of the Grand Meridian Hotel, acquired for $220 million in a deal that sent shockwaves through Miami's business community, a ripple that would soon become a tidal wave. Back at the gala, Vanessa continued to hold court, oblivious to the seismic shift happening behind the scenes, her world untouched by the forces gathering against her. She laughed with her friends, her voice carrying over the crowd as she recounted anecdotes about her latest shopping spree in Paris, where she'd spent tens of thousands on couture gowns, or her husband's newest venture, a startup promising to revolutionize autonomous vehicles. She danced with Preston, who moved stiffly, his mind elsewhere, his thin frame almost lost in his tailored tuxedo, his eyes rarely leaving his phone. She toasted to her own importance, raising her glass to a room that seemed to orbit around her, her diamond bracelet glinting under the chandeliers, her laughter a performance for an audience she assumed adored her. Preston Hargrove, a wary man in his 50s with a perpetually distracted air, was glued to his phone, fielding messages about a new AI algorithm his company was developing, one that promised to revolutionize data processing and secure his legacy. His angular face, lit by the glow of his screen, showed no interest in his wife's performance, his thoughts consumed by stock prices, investor meetings, and boardroom battles. The night wound down, and the Hargroves left in their Rolls Royce, the Gala's glow fading behind them as they disappeared into the Miami night, the city's neon lights reflecting off the car's polished surface, their world seemingly unchanged. They had no idea that Marcus was already planning his next move, his mind sharp and focused as he prepared to step into a new role, one that would turn the tables on Vanessa's arrogance in a way she could never have anticipated. At 6 a.m., as the sun rose over Miami, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, its light reflecting off the ocean in a dazzling display, Marcus walked into the hotel's executive offices on the top floor, a suite of rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows offering sweeping views of the Atlantic and the city's skyline, its skyscrapers glinting in the dawn. The staff, still cleaning up from the gala, sweeping confetti from the ballroom floor, stacking chairs in neat rows, and wiping down tables sticky with spilled champagne, did a double take when they saw him. Gone was the black and white server's uniform, its starched simplicity a familiar sight. In its place was a tailored navy suit, its crisp lines accentuating his tall frame, the fabric catching the early morning light in a subtle sheen. His posture was commanding, his expression calm but purposeful, his eyes carrying a quiet authority that seemed to shift the air around him, a presence that demanded attention without a single raised word. The general manager, a wary man named Richard who'd always treated Marcus with a mix of indifference and condescension, his clipped tone a constant reminder of the hierarchy, was summoned for an urgent meeting. Marcus handed him a document, the ink still fresh from the overnight signing, the paper crisp and official, its legal language a testament to the deal's finality. "You're looking at the new owner," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight, each word measured and deliberate, leaving no room for doubt. Richard's jaw dropped, his eyes scanning the paper in disbelief, his fingers trembling slightly as he held it, the reality sinking in. The document confirmed that Wells Ventures, represented by Marcus Wells, had acquired the Grand Meridian in a cash deal that left no room for debate, its terms airtight. Richard stammered, his face paling as he tried to process the information, his usual air of superiority replaced by a stunned silence, his mind grappling with the impossible. "Marcus, how?" he began, his voice faltering, but Marcus cut him off with a polite nod, his expression unyielding but not unkind. "We'll talk more later," he said, his tone firm, signaling the conversation was over. He thanked Richard for his time and moved on, his focus already on the work ahead, his mind a whirl of plans and possibilities. By 8 a.m., the news had spread like wildfire through the hotel, racing through the service corridors, the kitchen, and the housekeeping stations, a current of excitement and disbelief electrifying the staff. Marcus, the waiter they'd worked alongside for years, the one who'd always stayed late to help with cleanup or cover a shift without complaint, was now their boss, the owner of the Grand Meridian. Some couldn't believe it, whispering among themselves in the hallways, break rooms, and service elevators, piecing together rumors about how he'd pulled it off, their voices a mix of awe and skepticism. "I knew he was smart," one housekeeper, Maria, said, shaking her head as she folded linens in a supply closet, her hands moving with practiced ease, her eyes wide with wonder. "He was always reading those books, always asking questions about the hotel, the guests, how things worked. But this is something else." Others, like Carla, grinned ear to ear, proud of the man they'd always known was different, their voices thick with emotion as they shared the news. "Is one of us?" she told a group of servers in the kitchen, leaning against a counter cluttered with trays of dirty glasses, her hands gesturing animatedly. "And now he's calling the shots. Can you believe it? Marcus Wells, running the show." Javier, the young server who'd witnessed Vanessa's outburst, clapped his hands, a wide smile breaking across his face as he stood near the dishwashing station, the hum of the machine a backdrop to his excitement. "This is what I'm talking about," he said, his voice loud with pride. The man's a legend, a straight-up legend. Marcus called a staff meeting at 9 a.m., gathering everyone in the hotel's conference room, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Miami's skyline, the morning sun casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table at its center. Servers, housekeepers, concierges, bellhops, and managers filed in, filling the room with a mix of curiosity and anticipation, their uniforms a patchwork of black and white aprons, pressed shirts, and name tags that glinted under the fluorescent lights. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his hands clasped in front of him, his posture relaxed but commanding, his presence filling the room without effort. He didn't gloat or dwell on the past, didn't recount the humiliation of the previous night. Instead, he spoke with a quiet authority, his voice steady and clear, his eyes meeting those of his former coworkers, many of whom still couldn't believe he was standing there as their boss. "This place is going to change," he said, pausing to let the words sink in, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the faces of people he'd worked alongside for years. Better wages, better conditions, and a culture where everyone is respected. "No one will ever be humiliated here the way I was last night." The staff listened in stunned silence, some nodding, others wiping away tears, their hands clutching aprons or pens, their emotions raw and unguarded. Marcus's words weren't just about policy, they were a promise, a declaration that the Grand Meridian would no longer be a playground for the arrogant, a place where wealth could buy the right to demean others. He spoke for only 10 minutes, but his words carried weight, each one landing like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the room. He detailed plans to renovate the employee break rooms, which had long been cramped and neglected, their peeling paint and flickering lights a daily reminder of their low priority. They would become modern, comfortable spaces with new furniture, better lighting, and even a small library stocked with books on business, technology, and personal development, a nod to his own self-education. He announced a 20% wage increase across the board, effective immediately, drawing gasps from the room. The sound a collective release of years of financial strain. He outlined plans for training programs in hospitality management, finance, and coding, giving his staff the tools to build careers beyond the hotel if they chose, to dream bigger than their current roles. He spoke of a scholarship fund for employees' children, named the Lorraine Wells Scholarship in honor of his mother, who'd always dreamed of giving kids in Overtown a chance at higher education. "You're not just staff," he told them, his voice softening, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on faces he knew. Carla's weathered smile, Javier's eager grin, Maria's tear-streaked cheeks. "You're the heart of this place. This hotel doesn't run without you, and I'm going to make sure you're treated that way." As the meeting ended, the room erupted in applause, a mix of relief and hope washing over the group, their claps echoing off the walls. Carla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, Javier pumped his fist in the air, and Maria clapped so hard her hands stung, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in years, they felt seen, valued, not just cogs in a machine serving the wealthy, but people with dreams and potential. The real twist came at noon, when Vanessa Hargrove returned to the Grand Meridian, her presence as commanding as ever, or so she thought. She'd booked a spa day to recover from the gala, expecting the usual pampering and deference that came with her status, the kind of treatment that had defined her life for years. She strode into the lobby, her designer sunglasses perched on her head, her purse, a limited edition Hermes bag worth more than most people's cars, swinging from her arm, her heels announcing her arrival with every step on the polished marble floor, the sound echoing like a metronome. Her gown from the night before had been replaced with a sleek, cream-colored jumpsuit, its tailored lines accentuating her figure, but her demeanor was unchanged, confident, imperious, expecting the world to bend to her will. The staff, now aware of Marcus's new role, watched with bated breath, some exchanging knowing glances, others standing a little straighter, their name tags glinting under the lobby's chandeliers, their eyes sharp with anticipation. Marcus was there, standing beside the concierge, flanked by the hotel's management team, including Richard, who looked visibly uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting with a pen, his eyes darting nervously as if he wished to be anywhere else. Marcus looked up as Vanessa approached, his expression calm but resolute, his eyes steady, carrying a quiet power that seemed to shift the air in the room, a presence that demanded respect without a single raised word. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his tone polite but firm, carrying a weight that silenced the lobby, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. "Welcome to my hotel." Vanessa's face froze, her lips parting in disbelief, her eyes widening as if she'd been struck, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "Your hotel?" She scoffed, her voice loud enough to echo through the marble-clad space, her eyes narrowing as if she could dismiss the moment with a laugh, her confidence a fragile shield against the impossible. "What is this nonsense?" She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, looking around as if expecting someone to correct the mistake, to step forward and restore the natural order of things, her order, where she reigned supreme. The staff remained silent, their eyes fixed on Marcus, some suppressing smiles, others watching with a quiet intensity, their loyalty to him unspoken but palpable. A bellhop in the corner, a young man named Diego with a quick smile and a knack for reading the room, gripped his cart, his knuckles tight, watching the scene unfold with barely concealed anticipation, his heart racing with the thrill of what was coming. A concierge, a young woman named Lena who'd worked with Marcus for years, bit her lip to keep from grinning, her hands clutching a stack of guest folios, her eyes bright with admiration. Marcus reached into his pocket and handed Vanessa a business card, the embossed text reading Marcus Wells, CEO, Wells Ventures, its sleek design and heavy cardstock a stark contrast to her crumbling composure. "As of 2 a.m., I own the Grand Meridian," he said, his voice steady, each word deliberate, cutting through her disbelief like a blade through silk. "And I'm making some changes. Starting with a new policy, anyone who disrespects my staff will be asked to leave, permanently." The lobby was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant clink of a glass from the nearby bar, where a bartender paused mid, poured a watch, his eyes wide with curiosity. Vanessa's cheeks flushed a deep red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find a response, her usual poise unraveling like a poorly stitched seam. Her eyes darted to the business card, its text a damning confirmation of the truth, then back to Marcus, searching for a crack in his calm, a hint that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but the reality staring her in the face. But there was none. Marcus stood tall, his expression unflinching, his eyes steady, his presence commanding in a way that needed no shouting or grandstanding, his authority rooted in the quiet certainty of his triumph. The staff, watching from the sidelines, stood a little taller, their expressions a mix of pride and satisfaction, their loyalty to Marcus a silent force in the room. Carla, standing near the concierge desk, folded her arms, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched Vanessa unravel, her heart swelling with pride for the man she'd always known was destined for more. Javier, nearby, let out a soft whistle under his breath, his eyes wide with admiration, his grin barely contained. Lena, the concierge, clutched her stack of papers, her heart racing with a mix of awe and vindication, her lips twitching with the effort to stay professional, though she wanted nothing more than to cheer. Vanessa clutched her purse, her knuckles white, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger and humiliation. Her gaze darted to the staff, then to Richard, who avoided her eyes, his face a mask of discomfort, his fingers still fidgeting with the pen, his silence a betrayal in her mind. She opened her mouth as if to speak, to protest, to reclaim her authority with a sharp retort, but no words came, her voice caught in her throat. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, the realization that her status, her wealth, her carefully curated image meant nothing in the face of Marcus's quiet triumph, a triumph built on years of work she could never comprehend. Her world, built on the assumption of untouchability, had shifted beneath her feet, leaving her exposed and powerless. Without a word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the lobby, her heels echoing in the silence, each step a desperate attempt to reclaim her dignity, her spa appointment canceled, her ego in tatters, her status meaningless in this new reality. The staff watched her go, some exchanging glances, others letting out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding, the tension in the room dissipating like morning fog. Diego, the bellhop, broke into a grin and whispered to a coworker, "Did you see her face?" She looked like she swallowed a lemon whole. Lena finally let out a soft laugh, shaking her head as she returned to her work, a new respect for Marcus settling in her chest, her hands steadier as she sorted through guest requests. By evening, the story was spreading across Miami's social circles, whispered in country clubs where men in tailored blazers sipped scotch, shared in group chats buzzing with emojis, and debated over cocktails at rooftop bars overlooking the city's twinkling lights, the ocean a dark expanse in the distance. It started as a rumor, a wild tale that seemed too good to be true, but it gained traction with every retelling, each version adding a new layer of awe, the details growing sharper with each recounting. Posts on X lit up with reactions, the story going viral as users shared their takes. Their words, capturing the collective thrill of justice, served in a world that often seemed to reward cruelty. Here, a waiter bought the Grand Meridian after some rich lady humiliated him. One post read, racking up thousands of likes and retweets. The hashtag #FedJusticeServed trending by midnight, its reach spreading across continents. Another user wrote, "This is the kind of story that gives you chills. Power isn't what you think. Marcus Wells is a name to remember, mark my words." A third post, from a local journalist with a knack for breaking news, hinted at digging deeper. Who is Marcus Wells, and how did he pull this off? Story of the year. Stay tuned for more. Comments poured in, some praising Marcus's rise as a triumph of the underdog, others speculating about his background, piecing together fragments of his story from whispers and rumors. A few defended Vanessa, arguing she'd been unfairly targeted, but their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support for the waiter-turned-owner, the narrative resonating with anyone who'd ever felt dismissed or belittled. The story crossed oceans, shared in coffee shops in Chicago, where baristas swapped tales of their own encounters with entitled customers, debated in boardrooms in Dubai, where executives saw in Marcus a model of strategic brilliance, and discussed over dinner in Sydney and Karachi, where families marveled at the audacity of his rise, the story a universal reminder of resilience in the face of arrogance. Marcus didn't comment publicly, staying out of the spotlight as always, his focus on the work ahead rather than the buzz swirling around him. But those close to him, Elena, his lawyer, whose sharp mind and fierce loyalty had made the deal possible, James, his proxy who'd navigated the negotiations with surgical precision, and a handful of trusted advisors who'd watched his rise from the shadows, knew this was just the beginning, a single chapter in a story that was far from over. The Grand Meridian was no longer just a hotel, it was a symbol of a man who'd taken the cruelty thrown at him and turned it into a legacy of resilience and power, a testament to what was possible when you refused to be defined by others' disdain. In the days that followed, Marcus moved quickly to implement his vision, his days a blur of meetings and plans. He met with architects to redesign the staff areas, ensuring they were no longer cramped, dimly lit spaces with peeling paint and flickering bulbs, but places where people could feel valued. With comfortable furniture, natural light streaming through new windows, and even a small library stocked with books on business, technology, and personal development, each title chosen to inspire. He brought in consultants to develop training programs, offering courses in hospitality management, finance, and coding, giving his staff the tools to build careers beyond the hotel if they chose, to dream bigger than the roles they'd been assigned. He raised wages by 20% across the board, a move that made headlines in local business journals, with one headline in the Miami Herald reading, "Grand Meridian's new owner redefines luxury with respect." The article praising his vision as a game changer in the industry. He established the Lorraine Wells Scholarship for employees' children, seeded with $1 million from his personal fortune, aimed at covering tuition for college or vocational training, a gesture that brought tears to Maria's eyes when she heard about it, her hands trembling as she thought of her son's future. The changes weren't just cosmetic. They were a statement that the Grand Meridian was now a place where dignity was non-negotiable, where every person who walked through its doors, guest or staff, would be treated with respect. Marcus walked the halls daily, his suit replaced some days with a simple button down, his sleeves rolled up as he checked in with staff, listened to their concerns, and made sure they felt heard, his presence a quiet reassurance. He remembered their names, their stories, their struggles. Javier's dream of opening his own restaurant, Lena's hope to study business at the University of Miami, Maria's worries about her son's college applications. And they, in turn, gave him their loyalty, their work infused with a new sense of purpose. The hotel began to attract attention, not just for its luxury, but for its culture, with guests noticing the staff's newfound pride and energy, their smiles genuine, their service exceptional. Regulars commented on the change, one writing on X, "Stayed at the Grand Meridian last week, and the staff were incredible. Something's different there. Feels like they're family, not just employees." Business journals ran profiles on Marcus, though he declined most interviews, letting his actions speak louder than words, his humility a stark contrast to the world he'd infiltrated. One article, published in the Miami Herald, called him the quiet king of Miami, a title he laughed off when Carla showed it to him, shaking his head as he sipped coffee in the newly renovated break room. The Grand Meridian became a destination, a place where the elite still flocked, drawn by its reputation, but now with an undercurrent of respect. Knowing the man who owned it wouldn't tolerate anything less, his authority rooted in principle rather than privilege. Vanessa, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale, her name whispered with a mix of pity and schadenfreude, her once unassailable status eroded by the story that refused to fade. Her social circle, quick to gossip, began to distance themselves, her once constant invitations to charity luncheons, gallery openings, and yacht parties dwindling to a trickle, her phone silent where it once buzzed with notifications. The story of her outburst followed her like a shadow, retold at every event she attended, her once commanding presence diminished by the weight of her own words, each retelling a reminder of her fall. Preston, embarrassed by the publicity, reportedly scolded her in private, his voice sharp with frustration as he paced their penthouse, its floor, tip-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that now seemed to mock her. His company, Hargrove Technologies, was facing scrutiny over data privacy issues, with regulators circling and investors growing restless, their confidence shaken by reports of breaches and ethical lapses. The last thing he needed was his wife's scandal adding to the noise, a distraction that threatened his carefully curated empire. The story of her outburst spread beyond Miami, picked up by blogs, news outlets, and even a few late-night talk show hosts who relished the irony, one joking. She tried to dunk on a waiter and ended up losing the whole game. The audience's laughter a stinging rebuke. Some speculated she'd leave the city to escape the whispers, perhaps retreating to their villa in the south of France, with its manicured gardens and azure views. But Vanessa remained, her public appearances growing rarer, her confidence shaken, her once vibrant social life reduced to a series of quiet evenings at home. Friends who once fawned over her now avoided her calls, their texts going unanswered, their social media posts carefully curated to exclude her, their absence a silent judgment. She'd always thrived on being seen, on commanding every room she entered, but now the spotlight burned, exposing her in ways she'd never anticipated, her carefully constructed image unraveling like a tapestry with a single loose thread. Marcus, for his part, didn't dwell on the victory, his mind already on the future, his focus unwavering. He was already looking ahead, his thoughts on the next deal, the next property, the next way to build something lasting, something that would endure beyond his lifetime. He kept his waiter's uniform, hanging it in a glass case in his office, its crisp folds a reminder of where he'd come from and what he'd overcome, a symbol of his journey from the margins to the center. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proving a point, that no one could define his worth, but him, that the slights and dismissals he'd endured were not the end of his story but the fuel for it. To his staff, he was no longer just Marcus, he was a leader, a visionary, a man who turned a moment of humiliation into a movement that reshaped their world. The Grand Meridian became a beacon, not just of luxury, but a possibility, a place where the invisible could become unstoppable, where hard work and dignity were rewarded. Guests began to notice the difference, not just in the service but in the atmosphere, a warmth, a pride, a sense of purpose that set the hotel apart from its competitors. Travel magazines started calling it the People's Palace, a nod to its new ethos, and bookings surged, with families, business travelers, and even celebrities choosing the Grand Meridian for its unique blend of elegance and humanity, its marble halls now infused with a sense of fairness. The story continued to resonate, not just in Miami but across the world, its reach amplified by the digital age. It was shared in coffee shops in Chicago, where baristas swapped tales of their own encounters with entitled customers, their voices tinged with hope as they recounted Marcus's triumph. It was debated in boardrooms in Dubai, where executives saw in him a model of strategic brilliance, his rise a case study in leveraging opportunity against all odds. It was discussed over dinner in Sydney and Karachi, where families marveled at the audacity of his rise, the story a universal reminder that power isn't always what it seems, that the person serving your drink might be the one rewriting the rules. Marcus's story inspired others, from young entrepreneurs in Overtown who saw in him a path out of poverty, their notebooks filled with ideas sparked by his example, to service workers in cities far and wide who felt a spark of hope, a reminder that their worth wasn't defined by their uniform or the slights they endured. The Grand Meridian stood as a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let the world define you, a testament to the power of resilience, ambition, and quiet determination in the face of adversity. Marcus's rise sparked a ripple effect in Overtown too, his success a beacon for a community long overlooked. He began investing in his neighborhood, funding a community center with a computer lab where kids could learn to code, just as he had, their screens glowing with the same tutorials that had shaped his path. He partnered with local schools to provide mentorship programs, bringing in professionals to teach financial literacy and entrepreneurship, their lessons a bridge to futures once thought unreachable. He hired local contractors for the hotel's renovations, giving business to people he'd grown up with, people who'd known him as the kid with big dreams and a secondhand laptop, their pride in him palpable as they worked side by side. The Lorraine Wells Scholarship grew, with applications pouring in from employees' children, each one a reminder of his mother's legacy, her belief in education as a way out and up. One evening, as he walked through the community center, watching kids type code on new computers, their faces lit by the glow of possibility, a teenager approached him, her eyes wide with admiration, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "I want to be like you someday." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling, and handed her one of his business cards, its embossed text a symbol of his journey. "You already are," he said, his voice warm but firm. "Just keep going, and don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." The story of that night at the Grand Meridian became a legend, retold in countless variations, each one amplifying Marcus's triumph and Vanessa's downfall, the narrative growing richer with each telling. It was shared on podcasts, where hosts dissected the power dynamics, their voices animated as they unpacked the layers of class, race, and ambition. It was discussed in classrooms, where teachers used it to spark discussions about privilege and perseverance, their students' eyes wide as they debated what it meant to rise against the odds. It was kept alive on social media where memes and threads proliferated, each one a celebration of justice served. One viral video, posted by the influencer who'd been at the gala, showed a blurry clip of Vanessa's outburst, her voice shrill and cutting, followed by a still of Marcus in his suit, his expression calm and resolute, the caption reading, "Never judge a book by its cover." Pay Grand Meridian. The video racked up millions of views, sparking debates about privilege, ambition, and the quiet power of those who refuse to be diminished. Some called Marcus a hero, others a genius, but he remained focused on his work, letting the world talk while he built. His days filled with meetings, plans, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd changed the game. Months later, the Grand Meridian hosted its first major event under Marcus's ownership. A tech conference that drew innovators from across the globe, their laptops and ideas filling the ballroom with a new kind of energy. The space, once the stage for Vanessa's cruelty, was now transformed, the staff moving with confidence, their smiles genuine, their service infused with pride. Marcus stood at the back, watching the event unfold, his suit impeccable, his presence understated but undeniable, his eyes scanning the room with the same quiet intensity he'd carried that night. A guest, a young startup founder with a bright smile and a notebook full of ideas, approached him, unaware of his story, her eyes wide with admiration for the hotel's atmosphere. "This place is incredible," she said, her voice eager. "What's the secret?" Marcus smiled, his eyes drifting to the glass case in his office, where his waiter's uniform hung, a silent reminder of his journey. "It's the people," he said simply, his voice warm but firm. "Always the people. Wherever you're reading this, whether it's Chicago, Dubai, Sydney, Karachi, or anywhere else, share this story. It's a call to recognize the power in those who go unnoticed, to challenge the assumptions that divide us, to celebrate the triumph of resilience over arrogance. It's a reminder that the person pouring your coffee, carrying your bags, or serving your meal might be the one rewriting the rules, their quiet strength a force that can shift the world. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share it on X, or tag someone who needs to hear this. Let's keep this story alive, a tribute to the idea that no one is too small to change the game, that the greatest victories often come from the quietest places, built on the strength of those who refuse to be defined by others' disdain, their dreams forged in the crucible of resilience and ambition.